So this is how you remove the right-hand engine mount on the Subaru Justy. It's down here below the intake. You've got 4 clips on the airbox, so unclip those. Got 1 electrical connector over here. Squeeze the little locking tab to unlock that. Take this rubber hose off right here. Loosen this clamp so that you can take this off. There should be bolts here, here, and here that hold this in, but they are missing on this Justy, so mine pulls right out, but you should have to take those out. Probably going to be a 10mm or a 12mm bolt. Be careful, there are still some connections under here, but you can just set this to the side, and then you're down here to the mount. There's 2 14mm bolts here and here to take out, and then there's 1 14mm bolt that goes through the bushing. So take that out, take that out. You shouldn't have to support the engine underneath or anything. I took this one out without jacking the engine up or supporting it or anything, and everything was good. So this is how you remove the upper engine mount, which is right here. There is a stud back here, and there should be a 14mm nut on there, which I've already got off, a nut and a washer. And then there's a 14mm bolt here with a bolt and a nut. So take that nut off, take this bolt out. Once those are out, it can be a little difficult to get the bushing out, especially with this hose on here, and get it off of, slide it off of that stud. So you can take this hose off of the brake booster. It'd probably be easier and give you better room if you took it off right here at the intake, just a vacuum hose. And then that gives you a little more room to get this up, and then slide it off of that stud. You can take it out. And clearly I've already removed the old bushing out of this one. I also want to say ahead of time, don't pay attention to this bushing. This is something from when I was very first experimenting with the polyurethane bushings and mounts, and I literally just poured polyurethane into this mount, and it was just a very rudimentary test. So this one has obviously already been removed, and as you can see the difference, there's a steel sleeve inside the actual mount itself. So yeah, don't pay attention to this. This is obviously not the factory bushing, but this steel sleeve in here is the still the factory part. I did not push that out when I did this. Now for these to fit, you have to remove the whole steel sleeve. You can't just cut this rubber out, because that steel sleeve needs to be removed as well. And there's a few ways to do that. You can use a press, like a hydraulic press. Find something that's just the right size to touch this inner sleeve but not touch the outer part, and then push that whole bushing out. But if you don't have a press, which I actually do not, you can try to do the same thing, maybe in a vise. Get something to press these out that's the right size, as long as your vise opens up far enough to do that. You can also try hitting it out if you can find something. This is actually made for this type of scenario, more of seals and bearings, but can be used for this if you find something that, again, is just the right size. The way I got this one out was actually using a hacksaw. If you take the blade loose and put the blade through there and cut a slit in that steel ring, just through that steel ring, not into the mount itself, but just that inner steel ring, you'll release that tension because you're causing a gap there. This is a press fit, so this is like a little bit bigger than the bore so that it's really tight in there. And when you cut that slit in there, it allows it to collapse a little bit, and therefore you can hit it out pretty easily. And that's actually how I did this one, and that's how I'm going to do this one as well. So you can use, whatever saw or blade or whatever you have to cut through this. I'm just using this hacksaw. You could use a reciprocating saw, an actual power tool. You can use a small one like this. I'm going to use this big one. You take the blade off like that. So this is the bushing out of the upper mount, and this was another experiment I did very early on. I actually used polyurethane out of a caulking tube like this, which is a DIY thing that I did not invent by any means. Many people have done it, but it's very hard, so it transmits a lot of vibration through the car. I just took the factory mount, I left it in there and filled it up, but it was not the best result. So what you'll be dealing with, and since I don't have a steel sleeve, I've already taken the steel sleeve out of this. you'll have the factory mount and there's gaps in the rubber. So you'll slide that saw blade through the rubber, and then you'll cut through the rubber down into that steel sleeve. Whereas I don't have the steel sleeve, so I'm just going to stick it straight through the hole and then cut straight over. So we'll get this back in the saw. Alright, so it looks like I threw the steel sleeve. Hopefully you can see that there. Cut through just the steel sleeve. And what that's going to do is, now that there's a gap in it, it will allow it to release its tension, which is pushing out. And you should be able to hit this out a lot easier now. Now, if you do that and it still seems too tight, you can always cut another groove anywhere else, and that will create double the amount of tension that it's releasing than just that one groove. Like I said, that'll make it even easier to get it out of there. So I went ahead and cut a second groove in there. I already had the saw and everything, and it's really not that hard anyways. Makes it easier than beating on it with a hammer even more. So I'm going to take punch and a hammer and just go right on that steel sleeve around here. I've got it set in the vise to where the vise is only touching this outer part, and it will allow the inner part to slide through. Where I cut both of those grooves in there, it completely released the tension. You can see where it allowed it to collapse and then therefore press through, so it's coming out really easy. And there's that. But yeah, so this is completely trash. You don't need anything to do with this. This can be thrown away. So once you get the old bushing out, you can see there's some rust in there and stuff like that. So it's not a bad idea to take some sandpaper or something like that and clean the inside out a little bit, clean it up a little bit. And then it's not a bad idea to take some sandpaper or a file and clean up this inner edge, especially if when you were knocking the bushing out, if you caught the edge of this and maybe put like a metal burr on it, that metal burr can kind of catch the bushing as you're trying to push it in. I'm just going to take a wire brush on a drill, clean up the inside a little bit. You can see nothing too crazy, just cleaned it up a little bit. Just anything that might have been abrasive in there or a snag. And then you want to take some silicone-based grease of some sort. Silicone-based grease does not chemically degrade the polyurethane rubber, whereas petroleum grease can degrade the rubber over time. If you want to lube up this surface here on the bushing, this back surface here, because it's going to rub against that, and the other surface on here. Now, don't judge me by these bushings. These bushings are misfits. I would not sell these. I'm only using these on my guinea pig car that I just do the testing on and use to design the bushing dimensions and things like that. So don't judge me by these bushings. They do have defects, and that's why I'm using them on my guinea pig car instead of selling or just throwing them away and them going to waste. They'll functionally be perfectly fine for this car, but each set is sold as 2 bushing halves. So if you want the upper mount, you'll get 2 bushing halves and a steel sleeve. I'm also using an old steel sleeve for this car, again, because it's my guinea pig car, but you'll receive a brand new steel sleeve and 2 bushing halves. And then for the right hand mount, same thing. It's a different bushing, it's a different shape, different size. You get 2 bushing halves and a steel sleeve. Each one of those sets is sold individually. But yeah, so I'll lube up all the contact surfaces. That'll be out here, this back surface, and inside the hole where the steel sleeve will go. I'll lube all of that up with silicone-based grease because dry polyurethane bushings can sometimes cause a squeak noise. More with suspension than it would be with an engine mount, but still, just to be safe, just to keep it quiet and to maximize the life of the bushing, it's best to coat it in some silicone-based grease. Alright, so I've got everything coated in grease. Got a layer of grease on that surface, and down in the bore on all the bushings. I also smeared a little bit in the mounts themselves and a little bit on these, just to make sure everything's good. So the flat-topped bushings are for the upper mount, and this coned top is for the right-hand mount. It's not that hard to tell them apart. This upper mount is actually a little smaller, so it'll fit loose in there. You know that's not right. So that one goes in here, and you can actually press these in with your hand. They're snug, but you can press them in by hand. So press that side in, press that side in, nice and flush, and then this is a little shorter, so that's the shorter steel sleeve. You can also push it in by hand. And then same exact thing for this one. These ones actually fit snug. These are the right ones for the right hand mount. Push that in all the way. Push the other in all the way. And then push the longer steel sleeve in. Until it's flush. And then these are both ready to be installed back in the car. So it's probably a good idea to go ahead and smear some grease on these faces as well, because those will actually be rubbing against the mounts in the car. So just to prevent any squeaking or wear from that, I went ahead and put some grease on those surfaces as well, on both mounts, because this one will also rub there. If you're doing both mounts, I recommend putting this one in first before you put the right hand mount in, because the way this one has to go back on that stud, it allows you to move this engine a lot more. The engine can move a lot more, makes it a lot easier to line everything up. Or if you're only replacing this upper one, it might not be a bad idea to take this mount loose anyways, just so you can move the engine around. But got that one started in there. I'll get the bolts started. Then putting it back in is easy, just like taking it out. Goes right down in there. Get your bolt lined up through here, bolt lined up in here. Now anytime you're replacing multiple mounts, you want to get the bolts just started, not tight, just started in all the holes, and leave them loose, and then go ahead and get all the bolts started in this mount as well. That way you still have more room to wiggle the engine around and line things up. And once all the bolts are started, then you can torque them down. And that's it. It's honestly pretty easy. Just make sure you got everything put back on. That hose, that connector, that clamp's tight. Got that vacuum hose back on. It's a pretty easy thing to do, so if anyone was curious of how hard it was, I hope this video helps you out.